Hey y'all, Fred here. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm going to guess that y'all have probably seen this knife or one of its many cousins on Temu quite a bit over the last few months. These have actually been out for at least 6 months that I know of. They initially came in, and still you'll find them at quite a high price on Temu. High is a relative thing, I guess, when you're talking about something like this. They originally came in anywhere from $150 to $180, and then they started dropping. And over Black Friday holiday, they got all the way down to $105. And I have been watching this one in particular since the beginning. And I said, back and forth, should I get it? Should I not get it? I don't know. And I said to myself, listen, if it drops down to $100, I'm going to pick it up. So there you go. That's why I bought this thing. I'm not going to put a link down below because I'm really not encouraging or recommending anyone else to go out and get this knife. I was just so curious, I couldn't help myself. I know a lot of y'all have probably seen these knives online and wondered the same thing for yourself. So I really just want to share my experience with this and let you know what I think about it. I kind of feel bad for these guys. So this company is a company called Miller Brothers. Miller Brothers Knives. And I went to look this up online, and I always try to go research the knives that I buy, the replicas of. I want to know, what was the original like? Was it any good? What did other people think about it? What shortcomings did they find? And I couldn't find almost any videos on these folding knives from this company. I found one or two kind of short review videos on all of YouTube. The rest I found were like the 60-second or so interviews at knife shows. You know how people walk up to the knife show table and they talk to the owners or people behind the table and tell me about what you got here, that kind of stuff. So there was probably a dozen or so of those where the guys were just kind of briefly showing off the knives they had on the table, but really no good detailed reviews of their custom folders. Now, they are mostly focused on like custom swords and big beefy fixed blades more so than these folding knives. And if you go to their website, at least as of this recording, they say they're not even taking any more orders for custom folders like these. Every folder they build, every knife they make is totally custom one-off stuff, right? So there's no I'm sure they use some machines, but everything is hand-built, and you'll see a lot of features and elements that are just even hand-carved, very handmade knives. Again, they focus more on swords and fixed blades than anything else. At the moment, I only see 4 total of these folder knives. They're all called T1s. That's it. They have a T1 model, and they all look different, a little bit different. Some have more of a tanto blade. They all have different designs and carvings on the scales, different designs and carvings and elements on the blades, etc. And the cheapest one at the moment is $1,900, which is just really a completely plain titanium scale, right? Just normal, plain Jane, flat titanium, and a very plain looking blade as well. None of the detail like you see in this one. As you go up, the next set that these are around is anywhere from $2,200 to $2,800, and the highest one, again, looks very similar to this, but actually has a penny embedded in somewhere in it, a little bit of copper features. That's $3,200. So that's the price range that these are in. We'll look through the details of this. These guys build really good knives, and I really genuinely hope that maybe by doing this review, someone might see this, a real collector who would never be satisfied with buying a replica version. And maybe some people will go and check this company out, because if you're into custom knives and particularly overbuilt, big beefy knives, these guys build some really cool stuff. So I hate that they've already been knocked off by the Chinese companies. I feel bad for them. I wish that wasn't the case. But at the same time, I don't think this is really their primary focus for their business. But nobody wants to be knocked off. But they build really cool stuff. So if you are a collector who's interested in big, beefy blades and are looking for something truly unique and handmade, give these guys a look, because I think you'll be pretty happy. All right, so with that being said, let's take a look and a deeper dive at what we've got here. Before we get started, if you would please download down below, hit that like and subscribe. The button's down there for me. That really is helpful to me. I appreciate that. I always like starting by taking a look at the box. I don't know, it's hard for me to know if this is really what their box looks like. I mean, this is a somewhat more elaborate box. You can see it's kind of textured cardboard. It does have, that is their logo on it. Of course, you know, Chinese companies tend to do that a lot. We're going to come back and look at this lock pin in just a minute. That's a pretty cool feature of this knife. Unfortunately, it does have a cutout, obviously, in the shape of the knife. That's kind of cool. Has an insert here that just says, hey, we will warranty it, but if you disassemble your knife, we will not warranty it. So that's their choice, their prerogative. In a little envelope here. They've gone to great lengths, obviously, to try to imitate. I think most people won't be fooled by this. This has kind of a fakey feel to it. You can see this is really a photocopy, although it, you know, it is what it is. The other thing is they put the year before the month. And that's a very European and probably Chinese thing as well. So in the U.S., and this is a U.S. company, a small business U.S. company. If this was made in May of 2023, it would likely say 05-23. So that's another giveaway that this is probably not real. But if nothing else, at least they're directing you back to, hey, if you want to buy the real one, here's where you will go to get the real one. And so I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Hey, I knocked off your knife, but I'm giving people directions on how to get back to your website. So that's what comes in the box. All right, now that we've done that, let's do some size comps because it's really hard to get a sense of how big this knife is on videos. It's just such a hard thing. So that's why we always do the comparisons. I'm going to break out the number. The one I always use is obviously for Benchmade. We go with the Crooked River, which usually dwarfs every other knife out there. And you can see in this case, it's obviously bigger than the Crooked River by a pretty good bit, and of course much bigger than the Bug Out. Silly comparison, but it's starting to give you maybe a sense of the size of these knives. All right, how about a PM2, or in this case, we have the OK81 and a 𝗶𝗶𝗳𝗲𝗃 down here as well. You can see it's much bigger still than both of these knives. It's going to be bigger than just about everything you'll have in your collection. We'll do a few more modern knives. We have the Civivi Vision. You can see it is dwarfed. Or how about the Shark Cub? There you go. So maybe this gives you a little bit of a sense of just how big and beefy this knife is. We're going to pull out the specs here and look in just a second. But this thing is huge. It's massive. And when you see the specs, you'll probably chuckle like I will. All right, I'm going to pull up the specs down the left side of the screen here so we can take a little bit of a look. I don't have anything to compare it to because every knife they have is custom, and so they don't really give specific specs. They just kind of give a range. Some of their knives also have an attitude adjuster that sticks out, a big triangle that sticks out of the butt end, so that could add another ½ inch or more to this knife. So let's just run this down. We're 9.5 inches full open length. The blade is about 4 1/4 to the scales, to the back front of the scales, about 3.7 inch cutting blade. You've got 5.3 inches on the handle when closed. What do we got? Blade thickness. So this is the big boy. It's a 1/4 inch thick slab of steel. Huge. Handle thickness 0.81. This is almost an inch wide, and by the time you definitely get out on this pocket clip, we have exceeded an inch wide. Let me see if I can give you some sense of comparison. Here's a pair of 3. Compared to, if I can hold it like that, the pair of 3 would easily fit completely inside this knife with room to spare. So you can see this is a big boy, right? The blade finish, we're going to talk about this a little bit more. This is obviously steel. It's a big belly drop point. It is satin. There's some hand rubbed satin elements on here, as well as partial bead blast. So they've gone to great extents on this thing. Obviously, this is a I say obviously because it's not obvious. A lot of people are going to say, it's not real titanium. I'm going to roll in some B-roll footage here. Before I started this, I actually got out the old Dremel cutting tool and put it to the inside of the scale, as well as this back spacer. Both are actual real titanium. So I know a lot of people would say, it's got to be aluminum at that price. It can't possibly. It's real titanium, y'all. I cut both my scales and my backspacer to prove it. Titanium pocket clip as well. The blade steel is supposed to be a Z wear, which is basically a CPM crew wear. and I'm pretty certain that this is not going to be either of those. I have no idea what the steel is. It's steel, and we'll see it cut in just a minute. The weight on this thing, I know everybody's asking that question, 14.81 ounces. We are just an ounce or so or two shy of a pound. This is a huge, heavy, big, giant titanium and steel knife. There are no weight relief cutouts on the inside of these scales, so it's just a solid slab. The new ones, as I mentioned, cost about $2,800. I got this one for $105. I'll roll over my my receipt. People, I don't know, people, y'all, well, not y'all. I know my good people don't ask, but I get a lot of people say, oh, you didn't really buy it. Somebody gave it to you, or they sent it to you for free. So anyhow, there you go. I'll put up my receipt. The blade thickness edge. We're going to look at this in a second as well. So at the narrowest point, we've got about 28 thousandths, and then you get up to this big, giant, beefy tip here, and you're about 45 thousandths right out here at the tip. However, it was ground really well. We're going to take a closer look at all the blade features in just a minute, but actually a pretty good job on the grind, and it's pretty darn sharp as well. All right, let's take a closer look at this thing. Let me fold this bad boy up. As I mentioned, I think I mentioned, the pocket clip is solid titanium. However, it's 120 thousandths thick. That's thicker than a lot of knife blades. So this is an unusable pocket clip. I can't even begin to. I'd have to put my pry bar under this just to begin to lift it. It's just so heavy and solid. However, I will say, having said that, I did see some videos of people with the real version of these knives, and theirs looks to be as solid and thick as this one. And they were able to use it. They said they could get it in over like stiff pockets, stiff jeans, Carhartts, work pants, things like that. However, I will point out the detail, and this is the section of the video where we're actually going to get into the detail, because there's nothing simple or plain about this pocket clip at all. You can see it's clearly a fully milled titanium pocket clip. They've gone to great lengths to, I guess, match an original one at some point in time that these guys made, with lots of additional cutouts all the way around. They even have some dark wash versus some hand-rubbed and polished sections of this clip, as they have done with the entire knife. One of the other things, we'll talk about screws next. All of the screws in this thing, first and foremost, they're all T10s, all the body screws and the pocket clip screws. The pivot screws are T25, but they're all custom screws. I mean, they're all, you can see, they're custom ground or shaped around the edge of the head. Every screw on this knife is like that. It's pretty shocking, y'all. All right, so as I mentioned, custom pivots. You have a total custom hex-shaped pivot here, obviously steel. That's obviously captured. It's sitting down in a milled pocket cut out just for this pin. Steel collar around the pivot screw, which again is a T25. So that's a nice additional touch, but again, very custom as far as that goes. The lock pin. This is where is a good time to talk about the lock pin. It goes in two different places on the knife. So first and foremost, you may have thought this was a lanyard hole, and I suppose for all intents and purposes it is. However, this is also designed to be and intended to be, according to them, storage for this lock pin. Because what you can do is take this lock pin, which does have a tiny detent ball on it right there, and you can put it in the front of the knife, thusly. And now what you've done is lock the knife from being able to be open. Obviously, you can get it that far open. I'm sure somebody could still do a little bit of damage with that, but that's the intent there. Obviously, the real purpose is that once it is open in the full position, you drop this pin in there, and now you have basically, according to them, this is not my my call, it's their call on some of the videos that I watched. They said this is every bit as strong as a fixed blade knife. Now, I mean, it's not real hard to imagine why. You've got 1/4 inch thick slabs of solid titanium, which are not milled out. You've got a 1/4 inch thick steel blade. You've got this massive custom pivot screw, and now I just put another 1/4 inch lock pin through there. So you can imagine that's going to be pretty strong. You know, if there was any knife in my collection that I felt pretty good about maybe doing some spine whack tests or chopping wood, either in a chopping motion or in, you know, whacking the steel down through the blade there, this is going to be that knife. You're going to be hard-pressed to break this thing. However, having said all that, I do note that the lock bar relief cutout is quite thin right there. Don't know if that's enough to become an issue, but that seems to be a common breaking point when you put a ton of downward stress on that lock bar. It's going to go to the weakest point, and that one's a little on the weak side. I'm not going to do any of that with this knife, y'all. This is obviously just going in a collection that I have. I'm happy to have it in my collection. But anyhow, very cool about the stop pin as well as the storage spot for your stop pin. I thought that was a very cool touch that they added into the knife as well. All right, as I mentioned, 1/4-inch thick slabs on both sides of these things. I mean, it actually feels good. It has a whole forward choil here, right? You can see that choil. We'll talk about that in terms of, I guess, the ergonomics. So you can definitely choke up on this thing. But let's take a peek at just the milling of the scales for a minute, because this bears pointing out some things. So how does a Chinese company do this for $100? That's what I want to know. How can they do this level of work? If you look closely at the shape of this cross, that's not a 90-degree bend. So they didn't just program a cross shape that has perfect 90-degree angles into their cutting machines and spit that out, nor did they program these thicker to thinner kind of slashes that come down above here. You've got like hand-hammered elements here where somebody's clearly taken some kind of chisel or device and hammered in some texture right there. You have got hammered finish on the cross itself, as well as in some of this dark wash stuff. If I get the light hitting it just right, you can see even in the dark wash areas, this whole area is like hand hammered finished. Very custom, very hand designed. To have some kind of, how does the Chinese replica company do that? Do they have some kind of 3D scanning device that just scans to the micron level and can water jet or CNC somehow that exact kind of finish with even the hammered finish on the top of those elements? Then, to boot, they dark washed everything and hand rubbed parts of this whole area so that some would look lighter and brighter and some stays darker into the background, giving it a very 3D look. You've got dark wash on all of these cutouts here on both sides. Both sides are completely unique. One side is not like the other. Each side is built and cut out completely unique. Even these giant thumb pin stops up here, you can see those have been custom milled. Let's talk about how comfortable it is. Every edge on this knife has been knocked down or chamfered, but it's not identical. This is almost like a hollow chamfer on the top sides here, meaning it's a little bit concave. But when you look it down here along this edge, it's more convex. But when I look on this side, this is back to concave again. So even from side to side, the chamfering that's done is not like just they put it in a computer and said shave off 45 degrees. It's almost as if some of this is, and you can see this appears to be at a flatter angle than it is here, which is in more of a vertical angle. So it's not even just shave off 45 degrees around this corner. It's shallower here and it gets steeper as it comes around to this part. The level of detail and finish on this. Look at the steps inside that lock bar relief that we talked about. You've got the little milling patterns here with the holes cut out. You've got, this little pill-shaped cutaway here. I didn't mention it, but there is a steel insert, lock bar insert. Okay, so you've got steel on steel, big, heavy-duty, beefy. It's being held in by T8 screws, which are, again, custom. It does have a over-travel stop, may be hard to see, but right down in there, behind it goes, there's a steel over-travel stop as part of that steel lock bar insert. It's just a level of detail that I don't understand how they can do this from a Chinese company and have this much finish on it like that looks that good at this kind of a price when you're still talking about real titanium. And I don't know what steel, but it's not, I'm sure it's cheap, but it's not going to be, $5 steel. It definitely has held an edge a little bit. I haven't cut a lot with it, but it definitely feels solid. All right, so I'm gonna stop that part there. We talked about the frame lock, the lockup. We got the lock pins. It is riding on bronze washers. If you've noticed, I cannot flip this knife out with my thumb. I almost got it there. If you mix it, you know, with the right kind of flip and just really push that hard, you might be able, this thing, the washers are just not broken in, okay? I've taken this apart several times. I can show you what the inside of it looks like. The washers are just really stiff, but the detent on this is incredible. I don't know if that sound comes through the click, but that's not me jamming it in. That's the actual detent. Sucks this blade in and holds it so that it's hard. It's tough to pull out. Really strong detent, which of course matches up with the knife itself. But unfortunately, that makes it impossible to flip out. I cannot. You can see my thumb. I'm about to break it pushing that out. Just detent is too strong. You can obviously blade whack it. That's kind of silly with this thing. Look how solid this is. It's not. I blade whacked it. It's not going to break free. And if you're worried about that, stick this 1/4 inch lock pin in there, and it'll never break free. What you'll do is break that lock bar first. Obviously, no play, not obvious, but maybe it's worth pointing out. There is no blade play. Left, right, up, down, in, out. There's no pivot lash on this thing. There is no detent lash on this thing. So it's good. Solid all the way around. Shockingly finished, I guess, is the best way to say that. All right, we talked about this being a Z-wear, crew wear. The branding that you do see on the knife does match almost identical to what you see on most all of their knives. Again, every one that they make is custom, but they typically have this kind of branding. Again, unfortunate that they've chosen to knock this off from such a nice, small American company. Double pins here, of course, that locks it up there, but you also look at the size, how beefy this stop pin is right here that the blade hits. So you've got this gigantic stop pin internally, and then you've got the two basically thumb studs, which are not really the thumb studs, they're lock pins hitting into the shoulders right there. This thing, that's a pretty solid lockup right there. The blade centering, unfortunately, is not dead on. It's a little bit to the right. It's actually worse right now because I loosened my pivot a little bit. I was trying to get it to loosen up. I need to tighten it. If I tighten the pivot a little bit, it will move back to about right here, which is 1 micron off of center to the right. That's where it normally sits. But again, I'm not terribly worried about that, especially at the price that I bought this. Sharpening choil is outstanding. The plunge grind stops right here. So you have all of this. You can sharpen this thing, you know, into the next 2 generations, and you're going to be just fine in terms of a sharpening choil. All right, we talked about all the other thing I want to point out, you had to have noticed this. First, you have all these milling cutouts on the blade. You've got all of this, I don't know, you can call that a blood groove with drain holes. I guess that's what you would call this, but I'm going to try to see if you can see the detail right here. This is a horizontal hand rub satin finish. And you can see it's hand rubbed because the lines are not uniform. They're not consistent like you would see from a big grinding wheel or something going off on it. So we have horizontal, what appears to be hand rubbed satin finish up here. But then they bead blasted or glass blasted it. It's very fine, whatever it was, like probably a bead blast, to create this hamon design on the bottom of this blade. Now, this is identical. If you look at the pattern, I've studied the pattern on both front and rear, and it is the exact same pattern, simply reversed. So they obviously have some kind of template, but come on, y'all, after doing all this work, now they're still gonna go ahead and bead blast a portion of the blade and dark wash, because you've got definitely dark spots all around this blade that have been, again, hand polished to lighten up certain parts of it. Custom cuts and milling all around this thing. It's just, this is amazing. And it confuses me as to how a company can make a knife with this level of detail at the cost that they have made this at. That's really what keeps throwing me on this. All right, let's talk about the ergos. Well, no, let's talk about cutting, because we were just talking about the blade. So, you know, you buy a knife because you want it to cut, right? Is it the most sharp knife I ever had? The sliciest? No. But does it cut pretty darn well? Yeah, it's tearing something. I got something at the tip there I can see. So that's me, y'all. Yeah, that's me. There may be something at the bottom, but anyhow, you get the point. This thing, for a 1/4 inch thick blade, not bad, y'all. Not bad at all. All right, ergonomics, really nice. As I mentioned, everything is knocked out, smoothed down. Even when you choke up, look at these little indentations that fit that finger as it goes into the choil. Then you lock this second finger right around this indentation. And I'm going to tell you what, the weight on this thing is incredibly well balanced when you are choked up on this. I don't know that I would want to really carry and use this knife, especially if I bought the real one for $3,000. But I'm going to tell you, the balance on it is really nice. Speaking of balance, you're basically just behind the pivot. Right about here is where this knife balances, which is basically where you're going to be holding it in the rear position. The size, obviously, and the weight, because you have this nice rear end back here, gives you a nice grip if you want to do some chopping action. If you had to chop down some trees, stick your pen through there to give yourself a little extra security. I would certainly feel comfortable treating this like an axe. It's basically as thick as an axe is. So, but just to say that, I mean, everything, all edges are knocked down. They're comfortable, shockingly and surprisingly comfortable for what is basically an inch thick slab of metal. The jimping is, it's a little smoothed out for my taste, but I don't think that's a big deal. And then when you're choked up, you're going to get into these large jimps here, which actually do provide some meaningful traction if you were doing it. But again, as I said, just this choked up position right here, this knife feels really well balanced. So you can see I'm balancing this basically on my two fingers underneath right there. And look how perfectly balanced that thing is right there, holding it that way. That's the choked up position. All right, so don't know what the steel is. Here's the negatives. I have no idea what the steel is. I'm sure it is not a good high quality steel. The pocket clip is completely unusable. It is just too heavy and stiff. Obviously, this is an incredibly heavy knife. It's not something you're going to want to carry in your pocket very often. If you are like an NFL linebacker, then, or, offensive line or defensive line, then maybe, 7 foot tall and 300 pounds, this might be a perfect size pocket knife for you. Me, just being an average size dude, no, I'm not going to carry this thing. I just needed to buy it and see what it was. And I mean, can they really make a full slab titanium knife like this with that level of detail for $100? How does that happen? The other thing I would note is that the blade wasn't finished really well. Inside the tang area here, pointing upwards towards the scale, there were a little bit of burrs on the steel where it had been cut. So I did have to take a little, like a needle file, and file off some burrs that were scraping on this scale as the knife opened and closed. So that was the only real bad finish, fit and finish kind of issue. I can't flip this knife again, as I mentioned, just because it's too heavy and strong, and that detent is just too strong for me to push out with the thumb. Maybe if you have big, beefy, strong hands, but y'all, I flip knives all the time. I like to think that my thumb is somewhat strong enough to flip a knife. Overall impressions. This is a really well-built, overbuilt custom knife. I mean, if you can afford one of these and you're interested in overbuilt knives and you want something that's like a nice custom knife, man, you need to go check out the Miller Brothers, because they have some beautiful hand-built, hand-finished custom knives that are just really spectacular. I'm shocked at the quality of the finish and the elements used throughout here. I'm not recommending that anyone go and buy this. That's not what this is about. I just had to have it, and so I thought I would share my experience and what I see and what I got. You've got what appears to be hand-rubbed, hand-finished, hand-polished, custom-made stuff with bead-blasted partial satin hand-rubbed custom screws, all titanium back spacer, knocked down, decent ergonomics, good balance, sharp blade, 1/4 inch thick kind of knife. So there you go. There's my complete summary of this knife. If you would, please, down below here, hit that subscribe and notification bell. Help your boy Fred out. Throw me a thumbs up. If you like this kind of content, you can throw me a thumbs down. Let me know what you would like me to change. Otherwise, let me know what y'all think about this thing. I know y'all have seen it and somebody has wondered about it. So now that you've had a chance to look at it in a little more detail, I'd love to hear what y'all think about it. Otherwise, I will see you guys soon. Thanks and have a great day.